Hey everyone, this is Nick, and my flat currently stinks of paint and glue and renovation work, and there's someone behind this door currently repainting stuff. But despite the headache, I'm still going to bring you the latest Linux and open source news. This week we have a huge ruling in the EU that will prevent giant tech companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook and a lot more from stifling competition in every single digital market. We've got a new report on the GNOME project's health, and we've got the Intel engineers really improving performance for ray tracing on their Arc GPUs on Linux. Like really improving it like 100 times more. And speaking of 100, you can get $100 of free credit to start your own gaming or Linux server thanks to today's sponsor. Thanks to Linode for sponsoring this video. Linode is my favorite solution to run a Linux or gaming server. It's what I use to run my own Nextcloud instance and my own OnlyOffice server. The interface is super easy to use. They are affordable, they have tons of documentation online, and they have one-click deployable servers for a ton of applications or games, like Grav, for example. Grav is an open source content management system, or CMS. You can use it through a graphical admin panel or through the command line. Page templates can be written in Markdown, and it uses the Twig engine. And you can deploy it in one click on Linode and start building a website. And to get you started, Linode is giving you $100 of free credit to get your own Linux server or gaming server running. To get access to that, just click the link in the description below. At the beginning of the week, the EU adopted a new text called the Digital Markets Act. And this ensemble of regulations will have huge impacts on the major giant tech companies. This act takes aim at gatekeepers, or companies that can basically control who enters the market or not by using closed standards or voluntarily limiting interoperability. These gatekeepers are defined as companies that have 45 million monthly users and an annual revenue of 7.5 billion euros within the EU in the past 3 years, or a total market cap of 75 billion euros. And these companies will now be very limited in what they can do. Instant messaging must be made interoperable, so people can exchange messages across various applications. These companies can't rank their own products or services higher than those of other companies. They can't pre-install certain apps or software, and they must make removing pre-installed apps easier. They can't force users to have a default web browser installed by default, or prevent developers from using third-party payment platforms for app sales. And lastly, and more importantly, they can't reuse private data from one service in another. This means that, for example, Apple can't force developers to use their payment system, and potentially cannot charge them 20% if they decide to use another one, something they're trying to do already. iMessage, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger and others will have to be opened to other applications. No more forced Microsoft Edge on Windows or forced Safari on iOS, and no more cross-service Google profile. This hits Google, Apple and Facebook the hardest, but Microsoft will also be affected quite a bit. And I think it's a wonderful set of regulations to finally make those huge companies respect competition and stop erasing every single new company that wants to enter any single new digital market. System76 announced their new Oryx Pro laptop, 10 months after the last refresh. This laptop comes with 12th gen Intel CPUs, namely the 14-core 20 threads i7-12700H, and with either an RTX 3070 Ti or an RTX 3080 Ti. It can go up to 64GB of RAM and 4TB of storage, and as with all System76 devices, it has open firmware and core boot. It comes in either 15-inch or 17-inch, and the I/O seems pretty versatile, with Thunderbolt 4, a lot of full-size USB, microSD, Ethernet, HDMI, mini DisplayPort, and an audio jack. The display is 1080p 144Hz for both models, and it weighs 2.4 kilos for the 15-inch and 2.8 kilos for the 17-inch. It starts at $2,200 for the 15-inch with 8GB of RAM and 240GB of SSD, which feels a bit steep. Still, System76 has great support and their devices are generally very high quality. So if you're in the US and you're looking for a device from somebody who supports Linux development, System76 is probably your best option. There's another look at the health of the GNOME project, a year and a half after the last report. These posts are always interesting as they show new contributors, which companies contribute the most, on which app, and more. So this time there seems to be a lot more first-time contributors, 200 more than in previous years. But they didn't stick around much after their first contribution, something attributed to the remote work, then return to the office state of things in 2020 and 2021. Most contributions don't seem to come from a specific company, although Red Hat has a lot of commits compared to other companies. GIMP, GStreamer, and GTK are projects that see a lot more active contributors than others, and evolution seems to dwindle in terms of support, and translations are the domain that see the most contributions. All in all, everything seems well in GNOME land. There is not a single company that commits most of the work, everything is mostly done by individuals, most projects still see a good amount of support, and it's still attracting new contributors every year. Looks good. So, as GUADEC, the annual GNOME conference, takes place in Mexico, there are still some new developments and releases for the GNOME apps and libraries. This week they highlighted the release of GNOME 43 Alpha, which I already mentioned last week, and the parental controls app for GNOME is now ported to GTK4 and libadvital. GNOME Health has a new release that fixes a lot of bugs and has more reliable notifications. GNOME Commit, an app that lets you write better Git commit messages, now has a theme switcher and better dark mode support. Finally, Workbench, the sandbox to learn and prototype using GNOME technologies, now has a new release that fixes crashes and underlines errors in blueprint code. Sophie Herold, who worked on the GNOME Circle and Apps of GNOME initiatives, also received the GNOME Pants Award to thank her for her amazing work. And yes, it's the Pants Award, as in they actually award you a pair of pants. Hey, it's still more original than getting a golden statue after having the misfortune of starring in a 3-hour-long, incomprehensible borefest of a movie. And yes, I'm talking about the Oscars. KDE developers shared more of their progress on all their projects. First, the properties dialog in Dolphin will now show non-EXIF metadata stored in PNG files, which is nice. The highlight over Windows in the present Windows effect is now a lot more visible, and looks pretty nice. Discover now displays a placeholder over app reviews while they are loading. And the draggable handles on the plasma panels will now display tooltips, so you know what they're actually changing. Sandboxed applications that want to record the screen won't stop recording immediately when you click the icon in the panel, instead asking you if you want to stop it. And the paper widget now has animations for its transitions. On top of that, the KDE Echo project continues its efforts to measure and reduce the energy consumption of KDE applications, starting with LabPlot, and looking at how to schedule automatic software updates depending on when this would have the least impact on your local energy production. I'm really intrigued about what the KDE Echo project is doing. Like for now it seems to be mostly figuring out how to take reliable measurements, but once they're past that stage, I'm really excited to see KDE becoming probably the most energy efficient desktop out there. Firefox 103 was released with a few interesting improvements. First, it will highlight required fields in PDF forms, which is nice to know exactly what you need to complete. Performance for high refresh rate displays, so over 120 Hz, has also been improved, and the subtitles that were already available in the picture-in-picture mode can now be modified straight from that window, as in modify their font size. These subtitles are also now available for Dailymotion, Allstar, Funimation, and more. WebGL performance is also now fixed when using an NVIDIA GPU with the proprietary drivers, and users that have spinning hard drives will be happy to know that Firefox should now start a lot faster on these storage devices. Pretty good improvements across the board, although the 2-finger swipe to move backward or forward in your browsing history is still not there, it's been pushed back, so that's a bummer. Intel seems to have trouble with their latest Arc GPUs, notably on the driver side of things. While on Windows these things perform really badly on anything that is not DirectX 12, and seem pretty unstable, on Linux they recently discovered that ray tracing performance with Vulkan was abysmal compared to what it should have been. Looks like they forgot a line of code, and Vulkan was using the system RAM to store its temporary information when using ray tracing, instead of the GPU's VRAM, which is much faster. So with one line of code, they basically multiplied this ray tracing performance by 100. These improvements should land in Mesa 22.2, which should be released at the end of August. Since almost no device seems to be available with these ARC GPUs just yet, it's not really an issue. But yeah, come on Intel, you really made a mess of this release. It looks really flaky. If you use PopOS and you also love your little Raspberry Pis, you'll be pretty happy to know that PopOS 22.04 is now available for the small computers. It's still a tech preview, so you can expect a few issues here and there, but if you really want to use it, you can already download it. There are a few limitations. It only runs on Raspberry Pi 4 with 2 GB of RAM or more, and on the Raspberry Pi 400s. It's also not an LTS release, which means you're not getting the super long support time on these devices. You could already use 21.10 on your Pis, but 22.04 adds a lot of improvements, with a newer kernel, pipewire, automatic updates, an improved graphical app center, dark mode backgrounds, and a lot more. It's pretty cool to see a mainstream desktop distro supporting these ARM devices. And I know I say it every time I talk about the Raspberry Pi, but I really need to do something about these devices on the channel. Fedora has always been known to be focused on free software, not including any proprietary stuff on their repos by default, or even on their Flatpak remote. Well, it looks like they're also going to restrict a certain Creative Commons license, namely the No Rights Reserved license, also called CC0. This license allows users to completely waive all their copyright and let anyone do anything with their work, except anything patent related. Which means that anyone using code licensed under CC0 might later be the target of a patent violation claim, putting the whole project at risk. Fedora plans to classify CC0 as allowed content only, which means it won't be allowed to be used for anything related to code. It's unclear as of now how many packages might be affected and would need extra work to remove and replace any code licensed under CC0. I really appreciate the protection from various weird licenses which would allow patent claim because, in my opinion, software patents are just the dumbest thing ever. Fewer gaming related stuff this week. The Steam Deck seems to have less and less new verified titles and more playable titles added to its roster. Until March and April, it was about 50-50, but now it's falling month after month, with only about 30% of all titles being verified. This could be due to a more strict review process, or simply because the Steam review team is now moving to older titles that are less well supported, or it might be the inclusion of user ratings in the mix. All in all, it might also push Valve to try and improve support for these titles through Proton updates, so it shouldn't be too bad. There's also a new update to Game Mode, the tool developed by Feral to get all the CPU cycles available to the currently running game. Version 1.7 should work across more distros. It adds a new config file to help control permissions and has a new utility called Game Mode List that just lists all programs using Game Mode. Halo Infinite Multiplayer is also now playable on Linux and the Steam Deck, but you will need to use GE Proton for it to work, and you'll need to remove the video from the games folders, so it's really not download and play just yet. SteamOS Beta also got Firefox as a Flatpak instead of using the system package, so updates should come more frequently. And the Plasma desktop session also got a theme reminiscent of the days where Steam was actually a real pain to use. The code also seems to bear traces of a future controller hardware revision, which might point to a new Steam controller, or just to a new version of the deck with minor adjustments. I really hope it's a new Steam controller, as this might mean that Valve is also working on an official, dedicated Steam home console. I've been playing my Steam Deck a ton over the past 4 or 5 months, and I'll have a new review after a long time with the device on the channel in August, so subscribe if you want to see that and see how the Steam Deck still holds up over time. What really holds up though is the devices that today's sponsor makes. Tuxedo is a company based in Germany, and they make laptops and desktops that run Linux out of the box. They have a huge range of devices, from the smallest Ultrabooks and NUCs to the biggest gaming towers or gaming laptops, and all of them are super configurable, with various CPU options, GPU options, RAM, SSD. You can even add accessories or select from a variety of Linux distros, and you can even have your own logo laser etched on the back. And of course, if you want to install your own favorite distro that is not directly available to be pre-installed, you can, because these devices support Linux really well. And if there are a few tweaks needed here and there, Tuxedo offers PPAs and repos that let you install the various configuration utilities you might need to get the best performance out of your devices. Seriously, they're great, so if you need a new device and you want to make sure that you support Linux development, click the link in the description below and get yourself a new Tuxedo laptop or desktop. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching this news video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment, whatever helps make this video more visible. And if you didn't like it, you can also dislike it and tell me why in the comments, because it will also help make the video more visible. And if you really like my videos and the channel, you can support me, either by clicking on the super thanks button or the PayPal link in the description, or you can join my Patreon subscribers or my YouTube members. Both get access to a weekly podcast and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover, and both links are also in the description. So thanks everyone for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!